Julian braced a hand against the tactical console of the Defiance, blood trickling warm and slow beneath his shattered collar. The bridge smelled of electrical fires and copper. On the main holoscreen, the image of High Duchess Lyra flickered through the static. Her imperial mask was entirely gone. Her fingers hovered over the communication console in her distant palace, tracing the projection of his bruised jaw. He leaned into the phantom touch, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second. The space between them spanned light years, but in that silent breath, they were millimeters apart. Truth is, it wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be a marriage of political convenience forged in the fires of a galactic war. When Terra Nova demanded a seat at the galactic table, the Eithilgard Empire threw them a boner-reluctant union between a seemingly ordinary human soldier and the High Duchess herself. Eithilgard expected a primitive brute, someone easily cowed by their towering crystal spires and rigid traditions. Lyra had certainly thought so. On their wedding day, she had kept her spine straight and her eyes averted, determined to feel nothing for the stranger beside her. But then the Xylax swarm poured out of the dark. The Empire was soft. Centuries of peace had bred a dangerous complacency, leaving their gleaming armadas woefully unprepared for an enemy that didn't care about honor or elegant strategy. The swarm just consumed. When the outer sectors fell in a matter of days, the panicked High Council made a desperate, cynical move. They gave Julian command of the reserve fleet, a broken, forgotten graveyard of outdated ships. They wanted a scapegoat. Instead, Julian brought the ancient, unforgiving art of human survival. The shift in Lyra happened slowly, then all at once. It started the night before he deployed to the front. She had found him in the war room long past midnight, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of star charts. He wasn't drinking spiced wine or reciting imperial poetry. He was agonizing over every ship, every life, bearing the terrible burden of command in a way her own generals never did. He had looked up, exhaustion carved deep into his features, and offered her a small, crooked smile. "They're sending you out there to die, Julian," she had whispered, the coldness finally dropping from her voice, replaced by a sudden, terrifying tightness in her chest. He had stood up, crossing the room until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He didn't bow. He just reached out, his callous thumb gently brushing a stray lock of silver hair behind her pointed ear. The physical contact sent a shock wave straight to her core, a sudden and undeniable gravity pulling her toward him. "They're sending me to fight," he corrected softly, his eyes searching hers. "There's a difference." Now watching him bleed on the bridge of a dying ship, that memory twisted sharply in her heart. He was out there sacrificing ships to save worlds, showing an arrogant empire how a despised underdog fights a hive mind. He was using their battered fleet as bait, exploiting the swarm's mindless path of least resistance to draw them into a fatal choke point. And it was working, but the cost was writing itself in blood across his face, and Lyra realized with a sudden, breathless panic that she could not afford to lose him. The deck plates of the Defiance bucked violently under Julian's boots. The swarm had taken the bait, pouring blindly into the narrow gravity well of the dead moon. It was exactly as he had calculated. A hive mind always chose the path of least resistance, utterly incapable of comprehending a trap built on sheer suicidal stubbornness. On the shattered main display, Lyra's image finally cut out as the ship's external comms array sheared away. Julian gripped the console until his knuckles turned white. He didn't issue a grand, sweeping speech to his bridge crew. He simply met the eyes of his terrified helmsman, the air tasting of copper and burning insulation, and gave a single, sharp nod. He hit the manual override. The chained plasma cores he had left adrift in the narrow channel detonated all at once. It wasn't an elegant strike. It was raw, asymmetric devastation. The shock wave ripped through the dark, a blinding wall of heat that collided with the swarm's vanguard. The impact didn't just vaporize ships, it severed the invisible psychic tether binding the Xylax forces. The hive mind shattered, plunging millions of drones into sudden, panicked isolation. The physical backlash caught the Defiance a fraction of a second later. The hull groaned, metal tearing as the kinetic wave threw Julian hard against the aft bulkhead. The air slammed out of his lungs, the crack of his own ribs echoing in his ears before the world collapsed into absolute black. It turned out surviving a localized plasma rupture hurt significantly worse than the blast itself. Julian dragged a jagged breath into his lungs, his chest burning with the tight, unnatural pull of fresh symph skin. He opened his eyes to the sterile, pearl-white ceiling of an imperial medical ward. The hum of the life support monitors was rhythmic and steady, a stark contrast to the chaotic roar of his last memory. Then he felt the warmth. Lyra was sitting beside the bio-bed. Her ornate, stiff imperial regalia was completely gone, replaced by a simple, woven tunic that looked like it had been slept in for days. The pristine High Duchess looked exhausted, her posture stripped of all ceremony. More importantly, both of her hands were locked desperately around his right arm, her forehead resting against the edge of his mattress. He shifted slightly, a ragged sigh escaping his lips. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, frantically tracing the heavy bandages wrapped around his throat and chest. She didn't call for a medic. She didn't speak of the Empire. She just leaned forward, pressing a trembling hand to his bruised cheek. "You broke them," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the past 72 hours. "The vanguard is dust, the rest of the swarm scattered without the hive to guide them." Julian turned his face into her palm, grounding himself in the soft heat of her skin. "The fleet? Battered," she replied, her thumb gently stroking the edge of his jaw. "But alive, the High Council. They are terrified of you, Julian, and of Terra Nova. They drafted the treaty this morning. Full political equality." He let his eyes drift shut. He had taken the burden of command, paid the physical toll, and secured his people's future. The Itelgard Empire would never look at humanity the same way again. "So," Julian rasped, his voice rough as gravel, "my tour is done. I suppose I should request a transport back to the Terra Nova sectors." Lyra froze. The sudden hitch in her breathing was palpable. She leaned in closer, until the space between them vanished entirely, her lips a breath away from his ear. "And what if I refuse to let you go?" she asked, the raw vulnerability in her tone stripping away the last remnants of the distance between their worlds. Julian opened his eyes, finding hers. There were no politics left in this room. There was only the quiet, undeniable gravity of the woman holding him together. "Then I guess," he murmured, his fingers shifting to interlace with hers, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be."